I don't think my individualism is any better than the collectivism of an indigenous tribe or something. But I think because it's the way I was born, I would never want to have my first thought be, forget about me if I'm not feeling well today. I need to take care of the tribe because I bring the water up or whatever it may be. I don't think I could unlearn that, and I wouldn't be happy there. But I respect it as different. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second of our group dialogues. I'm here with Grace, Maddie, and Ethan. Welcome, guys. Good to have you all here.
Thank you.
Gracias.
So what we're talking about today is a theoretical subject that can get practical very quickly, and that is individualism versus collectivism. Now, I chose this topic because we talked about advantage and privilege last time. And I think that's a nice specific topic that connects to identity very well. But this idea of who you are as an individual and when you find yourself acting in your individual interests versus when you think of yourself as part of a group and act in your group interests, I think underlies so many things that we're all going through right now. It's a way bigger subject than most people realize. It's so big and theoretical. I think it doesn't get discussed as much as it could. So I thought we would chat about about that today. I'm very curious what manifestations it's going to take in our conversation. Does anybody have any ideas that it sparked when I just sent a quick email before this and said, how do you think of yourself as an individual in relation to or in contrast with the collective? Anybody feel like jumping in?
I'll jump in if you don't mind.
Sure.
So two things came to mind. I think it was a really good prompt for you to be like, oh, I feel. This kind of helped me to identify the groups that I feel like I belong to or that I identify. So that came to mind first for helping me identify. But then the second thing is I studied linguistics and culture a bit in university because I did a double major in international business and French, but the culture studies and linguistics was really interesting for me. And so there are these different dimensions for how you characterize different countries called Hofstede's dimensions. And one of them is individualism versus collectivism. So different places in the world, different countries in the world, it's like a spectrum and they fall differently. And so the United States is like a highly individualistic place. I think it's the most, and then Asian countries are the most collectivist. So I think this is interesting because within our own groups or countries or cultures, there's a different, maybe we fall somewhere differently on the spectrum. So these are just two things that I kind of was thinking about when you brought up the topic.
Yeah, that's great. I think I've actually seen that where they actually score individualism and score collectivism based on a number of factors. And it's fascinating to see how they're ranked. You know what? It would actually be a good idea. Thank you for reminding me, Maddie, for us all to kind of go around and let's just start with how much you think of yourself as an individualist. I mean, there's something inherently American in that. Mm-hmm. And I believe we were all born in America. So maybe I can start and then we'll kind of go around. So I think of myself as a person that is quite a born and bred individualist, where I am a big believer in the American idea of exceptionalism, the idea that you can start from nothing and work super hard and become really prosperous and have a very happy life, which are two separate things, of course. And that's exciting, and that measuring yourself on some sort of hierarchical scale or competing with others is, the type of system you're participating in when you are engaging in this individualism or exceptional individualism. I didn't choose that. That was just the culture that I was born to, and the way it was talked about in my community. It was mostly talked about in the sense of striving to go to college, and especially a good college, and then becoming a doctor or a lawyer, and becoming rich. Maybe, I think in my household, like marrying somebody who is good looking and give you good looking kids. It wasn't said so bluntly like that, but I think that was important. So all of it contributed to quite an individualistic upbringing, and the idea of collectivism. What can we do to contribute to the world? Or maybe what could I do to contribute to Judaism or something like that, or any other group that I might identify strongly with. Those were very weak ideas. There was a little bit of Judaism that was, there, but I think of it as a goal of mine to become a little bit more collectivist. I think of future Evan when I'm 60 or something, I'm going to be acting in the collective's best interests in a greater proportion. And that's important to me. I want to contribute more, I think, to a small collective. I'm not sure which ones, but I'll stop there. That's kind of where I'm starting. Grace, do you mind going next?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard because I try to live with a very collectivist mindset because I want everyone to do well, because I think when everyone does well, the whole does even better. But at the same time, I've lived a lot of my life in fight or flight response, which makes it so sometimes I force myself. I end up being more focused on individualism than maybe I should be, because I'm worried about survival. And that's not necessarily the mindset I want to live in. And so right now I'm trying to find a balance between how can I further myself and better myself while at the same time creating a better world for others and helping other people reach opportunities, because I'm a firm believer that everyone deserves basic human needs and rights, and also the pursuit to gain something and make something if they have the tools or need help. So that's my thought. It's definitely, I'm not perfect at the balance yet.
Sounds like both are swirling around quite a bit. I hear plenty of individualism in there. Not meaning that like individualism is selfish, but there's the survival orientation and then the striving that you talk about. And from the last dialogue, I know that you're a person that really strives.
Yeah.
And that's more individualistic, at least I think. But that's interesting. I'm going to see I'll be interested to see how it develops. Ethan, can we go to you next?
Yeah. I don't know that I have a simple answer, but what I was thinking about, I definitely push comes to shove, I'm on the individualistic end of things, perhaps with an aspiration of becoming more collectivist, but also being pretty okay with the way that I am. I think something that I was thinking about is, I think a big influence on me was reading fiction was like a very formative experience in my life. Like, in some ways the most formative experience. It was like all I did for a long time. And I've realized as I've grown up what a sort of niche set of influences that had on me, where like almost by definition people who write fiction are pretty rejecting of society and the way that most people do things and the way that the kind of collective lives. And it's like still sort of surprising me to realize how that's not the influences that everybody has when they're 17. And I think that's very core to who I am, to sort of be an extreme skeptic and to really not have a very high esteem for the way that the kind of groups do things. And a lack of a desire, a sort of rejection of like big groups. And at the same time, there's like areas of my life where some sort of affinity for the group can be quite strong, but I think more in small groups than in some sort of like larger like nation or sort of identity sized groups, which I don't necessarily feel. There's special cases like Evan, you and I have talked about with like COVID. That's like a situation where like almost for I felt a stronger affinity than I ever had before for, say, the like 300 plus million mass of people in the US, and felt more connected to the choices I made in my daily life. But I'd say more generally, I can feel a strong affinity for local groups. Like I don't think I'm that individualistic when it comes to, say, friendships or, the workplace or my school at all. But when it comes to sort of larger society, it's I think that plays a smaller role in my life.
Thank you, Ethan. You bring up a lot of interesting things that maybe we can jump into once Maddie has shared how she relates to those ideas. But yeah, just the idea of if, can a group be so large that it's very hard to feel a connection, except in a special circumstance like what you were talking about with COVID, is an interesting question. And do you feel more connection to people that have traits that are like you? I mean, it seems like that's certainly so, but when can we go beyond that, and you can feel something for all kinds of people that are not close to you in many ways or similar to you in many ways? It's a very interesting question. But before we go into that, Maddie, how about you?
Okay, so I will get into kind of like the drivers or like the stimulus that have kind of formed my falling on the spectrum of collectivism versus individualism. So first, coming from the US, very individualistic, but then I'm from like the Midwest, which I would say is probably one of the most collectivist places in the United States. And I grew up in like a Catholic family, which I would also say is a very collectivist sort of grouping. So in the United States, I grew up further on the spectrum, closer to collectivism. But then when it comes down to like my own upbringing, I think it was very individualistic because I was moved around so much as a kid. There wasn't a lot of like stability with like, I am living with this mom and dad like my whole life. It was like this family member, these people, blah, blah, blah. So my individualism really developed. And when I was like 4th grade to 8th grade, I was by myself a lot. So I think I kind of grew up in a mentality of like, I become my own best friend. Like I take care of myself. At the end of the day, I have to take care of myself. And then also like the passion, the drive to go and explore the world. I did most of my traveling by myself. So this self-reliance like just grew stronger and stronger. But then I saw other cultures that really cared about collectivism. When I was studying in Finland, I just saw like groups of Asian people, Vietnamese, Chinese, Taiwanese people, and they were always in like huge groups together, and they just always stuck together. And I was like, this is crazy. And the other cultures kind of gathered together as well, like in this setting, just naturally because they're speaking the same language. But I was the only American, and so I just kind of like jumped around. But again, I always do this. Like even when I went to high school, I never belonged to a group. I always like hopped around. But there's another part of me, which is that I'm extremely like empath. Like I can feel other people's feelings, and I always want to accommodate others. And so in this way, I would say I'm very collectivist, is that I'm very sensitive to my environment and the people around me. And I kind of want there to be like a good energy. So I'm tapping into it and I'm trying to do what I can to make sure the energy is good. And then the last point I will say, where I noticed my proneness to being more individualistic, when I arrived in Mexico, where I've been since May, I joined my friend from France and another girl from France, and we traveled around for like 2.5 months. And I would say French people are much more collectivist, much more kind of traditional, gathering together, having meals together, taking care of things together. And I remember like the first month, it was really nice because I was in a foreign country, and they were just like touring me around, and they would make food, and this was really nice. But then I remember it's kind of like, I need to do my own thing. I need to decide I want to eat this or do that. And I could feel that like maybe there was some tension or resentment growing because I was craving this as a more individual person. So yeah, I think that covers all of the things that kind of came up to me for the drivers of where I land on the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of a few things. Now, all of you have given me a bunch of ideas. Anyone can feel free to jump in, but what you're describing as a person that's basically all her life traveled around and right now are once again moving around and traveling around is an expression of freedom. You're trying to find something, I suppose. You're trying to see things. You're trying to absorb cultures, meet people, I'm sure. And I guess it strikes me that if you were part of, let's say, like a indigenous group or something like that, where your first duty was to take care of your responsibilities within the tribe or something like that, then what you're doing would just be like totally different from, it wouldn't fit at all. So in many ways, it's quite individualist to travel a lot and see things. And I can't even imagine being a part of a tribe or something like that. And so I relate. I wouldn't want to move around as much as you have, but I do want to travel a lot. So I relate to you a lot there. And that's because of, I think, my individualism. I don't think my individualism is any better than the collectivism of an indigenous tribe or something. But I think because it's the way I was born, I would never want to have my first thought be, forget about me if I'm not feeling well today. I need to take care of the tribe because I bring the water up or whatever it may be. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you could I don't think I could unlearn that, and I wouldn't be happy there, but I respect it as different. Anyway, that's where my mind went when you were talking about that. All of us, I think, are being individualists in that way. Yeah.
If I can add on top of you, so if we start to identify some groups, like I guess I would definitely identify as like a traveler, but I would say a lot of travelers are kind of collectivists, and like we're looking out for each other because we know we're all in this together. There might be some language barriers, there might be some payment barriers, like there's all kind of like challenges that come up when you're traveling. And I would say like travelers look out for each other, like they have each other's backs. Like of course we have to be individuals and independent when it like if necessary, but there is like some serious like camaraderie and like genuine love and support that you meet in travelers just because they get it, like they know what you're doing and they want to help you if you can avoid like some kind of mistake that they made while traveling, or they can recommend you a place or a technique or anything. Like I would say it's interesting, like obviously like there has to be an individualism and independence and confidence to go and travel, especially solo travel. But there is very much so like collectivism and camaraderie in the culture itself.
Well, I want to make a definitional point. I don't think of what you're describing as collectivism. I think of it as social behavior, camaraderie,
Okay.
So the way I'm talking about it is when you're thinking of like a reasonably larger whole, almost like a community would be the smallest collective. Now,
Okay.
anybody else feel free to say, Evan, I don't share your idea of collectivism, but I think I bring that up because there's something about owing something to and acting on behalf of people that you aren't interacting with daily and not depending on like in an immediate discernible sense, that I think changes everything. I don't know if anybody else thinks of it the same way, if you kind of get what I'm saying.
Because the owing is that's the individualist take on, you know what I mean? I don't think people who grew up, who are very different than you would say, would describe their experience as primarily being owing. So it's interesting because that like illustrates the difference. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think I do, but what would they say instead of owing?
That I'm part of it,
Mm.
or what's good for me is good for them, or what's good for them is good for me. I think the viewing it as a transaction is the difference, right? I mean, the same way.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I would agree. I just thought of like a really simple like metaphor of like having a meal. And I feel like probably for Americans, they think, let me go get my fill, let me go get myself a complete meal. And the collectivist is like, let's count everybody in the room, let's look at the food, and let's decide how we can equally share all of this, as opposed to kind of like the American like view to like, oh, let me go make sure I can go get my food, let me arrive first, where the collectivist would be more like, okay, like once everybody arrives, then we can figure out how we will portion everything to like share it equally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree that anything that's transactional, like owing, is quite individualistic. The thing that I'm, I guess, becoming interested in from Ethan's comment particularly is that as a person that is mostly individualist right now, I still really value small groups like family, extended family, friend groups. And that's almost like part of my individualism. I don't feel a sense of owing when I think of the small group. I think, oh, can I bring a dish to a gathering? Can I, make it easier on a friend or family member in some way, generally speaking, depending on how I feel about them. But when it gets to larger, you're in a common space, and how much do you make sure you clean up and leave it nice for the next group of people you don't know? That's when it starts to weaken a bit for me. Well, I still want to do that, but I am conflicted. I'm not going to leave it messy, but am I going to like make it spotless? Depends on the day. Depends on how I'm feeling internally, I think. Grace, let's see if, do you have anything there? I want to make sure you, yeah.
You know, I'm just thinking about what everyone's saying. And, I'm very individual in certain senses. And then I'm realizing that I'm a lot more collectivist in things that I didn't think. Because, I, with our last discussion, like I work very hard and I have goals that I work incredibly hard for.
Mhm.
And I want to be successful. But at the same time, I want to make sure people around me that I might not even know are taken care of. And I also moved around a lot as a kid, like, probably when I was 10, I started moving around pretty young, and I've lived in a lot of places. And so I never really felt like I had a particular group. Um, and so that made me want to take care of more people as a whole, because I don't necessarily have one group of people that I'm always around. Like I haven't grown up on the same street for my entire life, and my street is my collectiveness. And then I was just thinking about collectivism in the term of travelers. And, I like to travel, but I'm not necessarily someone who does that like all the time and moving around. And I'm just thinking about, when you travel that much, are you giving to communities, or are you just taking from people's communities and cultures? So would that be more of an independent kind of thing, because you're not actually contributing to that society and you're just taking? That's what I was thinking. And that's not
So,
necessarily a bad thing, but
see. So yeah, I can jump in there. I think that with travelers, it can go either way. Like you can just take, or you can give and you can take. I think anywhere, I'm sorry, there's some random guy playing a freaking whistle on the street. Mexico, like there's always something happening here.
Uh-huh.
But anyways, I think that it depends on the individual in this case, because you can give. I think if you're giving money like to businesses, then you are giving, like you're helping to support the community, the economy. So you are giving. If you are trying to speak the other language and interact and share experiences, I think this is another way to give. So I think it's kind of about the demeanor, the attitude, kind of more like the subtle things than, I don't know, like where I was on the coast before I was here, I was on the Pacific coast, but a lot of like American and white people go to the other coast to where like Tulum and Cancun and Playa del Carmen are, and it's become extremely westernized. The prices are through the roof, and the people told me that Tulum, which is like a Mayan area, it used to be very kind of sacred and have like a really cool energy to it. And now this energy has become something else because all of these white Western people, mostly Americans, came and started to drive up the prices and started to shift the culture. And I think this is kind of the taking, right? I mean, still they're giving, I guess, with the economy, but they're taking like the culture away. But on the other coast where I was, it's becoming a cool hip area to go to, and I've been told it kind of has the vibe that Tulum used to have. But like when I would be walking around there, I would be walking on like dirt roads. Like you would be like, wait, am I walking in the jungle right now? Like it's still very much so like being like structured and kind of coming up, like it's becoming more and more popular, but it hasn't become like what Tulum and what the other coast has become in Mexico. So it really depends, I think, on the individual and their demeanor and their attitude and their approach to wherever they're going.
It's just, to me, it feels like, I don't know, and it might be the feeling like I owe people something. It's like, if I'm living or visiting a society, like a place, I feel like I want to be actually contributing in multiple ways and contributing to the growth of that community. And I feel like when you hop around traveling, you can't really contribute. And it's just taking, and like, yeah, you're speaking the language and you're giving the money, but what are like I don't know, it's just it's something I think about a lot when I travel. I'm like, am I here selfishly, or am I actually helping, and what am I doing for people here in the long run? But then if you go off the individualist thought, you technically don't owe those people anything, so it's just like an interesting thought.
Yeah, this gets to something that I think is like almost like a friction point. I would think it feels controversial a little bit to me when I think about it, because when for at least in terms of my personal belief, when I go somewhere, I assume I'm part of a system where I'm contributing money to the economy, and so that I can act within cultural boundaries, respect the way things are done, but do what I want because I'm exchanging money for access to, a place to stay and visiting shops and stuff like that. And that it would be the responsibility of the local government, let's say in Tulum, to have enough preservation of, roads in a more dirt state or whatever it may be, a more original state, and to make sure there can't be too much development. Because once you're on the capitalistic road, that's going to happen. You're going to see more and more development, unless, that is a good purpose of government. I'm a person that thinks that government should be involved only to a point, not too much. But I think a very good purpose of government is preservation, so that things don't get overbuilt and the original culture is lost.
Part of the downfall of visiting really cool places is that the more popular they get, the more, it turns into Tulum turns into a Cancun, and it hurts the people that, you get to go home to your nice house while you, after spending, a month in the rainforest, in the jungle, like in a hut, you get to go home and
Mhm.
leave that. And then their way of life is changing because they continually have more foreigners just going in, and then it starts to shift to capitalist. And so it's just like a hard question, like, does going really cool places actually hurt people that live there, and I'm selfishly hurting those places?
I think for me, I live in a very like gray area where nothing is black or white. So it's hard for me to ever say that something is right or wrong, because I always think, like with my nails, like there's light in the darkness, there's darkness in the light. Like there's always good in the bad and bad in the good. So like we said, like yes, it's losing its culture and it's becoming super capitalist, but of course it's bringing in a lot of money, which is helpful. It's tricky. The same thing is happening in Costa Rica. I mean, literally the prices at most of the places in Costa Rica is in dollars, American dollars. You pay in American dollars. And so you're losing a lot of the culture. But I think another point to bring up with like the taking, I think exchanging energy is also an important thing. Like exchanging energy is just as valuable as exchanging money. So if you are trying to speak the language in the place that you are, and you're exchanging energy, I think that this is of value too, because I think one of the core things of humans is that we are seen and that we are heard and that we are understood. And so when you go somewhere and you make the effort to actually engage with the locals and exchange your experiences and show people, this is what I'm like, this is where I'm from, you can get a taste of who I am and my culture, and I'm coming to you, and I'm not ignoring you, I'm bringing this to you. I think this is highly valuable, because I think when we see foreigners come from our cities, I know for me, I'm so happy to give them advice about what to do. And that's kind of how I pay it back from all of my travels, is like when I'm in my home or when I'm in like a really stable place for me and I have information and insight, I'm honored to pay it back. So I see what you're saying with like, if you're a traveler, are you just taking and taking? There's always like um, a pendulum that swings back and forth, like a wave that swings back and forth. And so I think over the course of life, you try to find balance with that. But I think just showing up with energy, with actually trying, is part of the giving.
I'm going to check in if Ethan has anything. You don't have to, but I just wanted to give you a space.
I don't know that I have anything particularly insightful, but I mean, I just was noticing that, well, I had two thoughts. One is that just an observation that, what Grace is saying seems to challenge Maddie some of the way you live your life. And that seems worth acknowledging in this conversation, given that, and when I say challenge, I don't mean criticize, I mean challenge. And I was also just thinking that for me, I haven't really had the ability to travel much in recent years, but I guess like gentrification is an example that, you don't need to travel very far to think about. And there's this question of like, in where I live in Berkeley, am I a gentrifier? I guess sort of. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't really know. I don't really understand how I've only lived here a year. I don't fully understand how the sort of like city is, if that makes sense. I mean, I'm certainly in an area. I mean, I'm in a relatively cheap part of Berkeley, not the cheapest, and I wonder there's two sides to it. I can, like for me, one thing I was thinking about is like, in theory, I work at like a community mental health clinic, right? So it's like I'm giving back, but like that's not really helping the people I'm neighbors with necessarily, like literally neighbors with. I don't mean like broadly neighbors with. And like it's like, what do like, I was just trying to bring it down to like the scale of my life. Like, there's a plum tree in my neighbors. It's like not really in their yard, it's like in the street basically, and nobody, that like hundreds of plums are like crushed on the street, like nobody is harvesting these plums. And a question that comes up when you live in Berkeley is, okay, how many plums is it okay to take? And I don't know the answer to that. And I like the idea of, or another example, there's actually a woman who was coming into our backyard and going to the laundry room, which you can access. There's like a door with the latch, and then there's no lock, and then there was no lock to the laundry room. And so there's this woman who's stealing small things. And right, there's like this question of like, okay, how do you handle this? Because like, the most likely situation is I live in her neighborhood, right? Where she's probably lived. And I don't know, it was difficult. Like, I didn't call the police or anything, but like she kept taking small things from us. And my house right over here looks out on the front yard. And so I kept being the one seeing her. And this question comes up, it's like, okay, I have these like values of like wanting to be a good neighbor in like a meaningful way, and not just like a BS way, but like, what do you do when someone starts taking things? Anyway, yeah.
So I really like that example, Ethan. And I really appreciate how you highlighted the contrasting point of views, or the point of views that are a little at odds. It's not something that I think everybody would have seen right away. So thank you for that. I think it makes it more interesting to do that. As far as the exact scenario you're talking about with the lady using the laundry room and taking the plums, I think this ties right into our conversation and the part that I mentioned before, that I think there's some controversy around in terms of how I view it, which is that I think you don't owe her anything. Like she could earn that by being friendly to you. I love Maddie's point about energy. If she came in and said, hi, I've lived here for many years, I don't have a laundry room, would it be okay if from now, then and again, I use it, and she built trust and was nice, she would have earned that. Without that, I would put a lock on it, and and I don't like that. Like, I want to be the guy that shares the laundry room, but not just with anyone. You do have to earn it. It's like saying everybody deserves your respect. I don't agree with that. I think that people have to earn your respect. You may start at a certain set point of general respect towards people, but you can't, it'd be hard to deny that people make impressions on you, and then you're more or less likely to be inclined to be helpful to them, or possibly harmful to them if they're harmful to you. So I guess I don't agree with the notion, nobody's said it, but I don't agree with the notion that you should just be community minded. I think that systems need to be in place to either preserve or encourage community mindedness. And if we're in just a standard capitalist system, as most of the Western world is, there's a lot of problems with it. Obviously, the model has a lot of problems, but there's a reliability to it, and it's the best one that I know of, where basically you get to choose how generous you are towards your community and people. And I think that's good, because through your own healing and development, like I'm going through, I plan to have my set point of generosity to the community raised. I would like that. And yet it's not just an open door. I think would be a very bad thing if the woman could use the laundry room and start taking your paper towels, and it slowly increases. I think that should be discouraged through social feedback.
I guess I wonder about your confidence in the kind of system, because like I think like when I hear that, you know, it all sounds sensible in theory, and then like to give two examples, you know, what you mentioned about the sort of local government in Mexico preserving, you know, it's a nice idea to think that it's that the local government will preserve, but I mean, my ballpark estimate would be that happens less than 1% of the time. That a local government, which is, there's no reason for it to be any less sort of corrupt or dysfunctional than any other organization. Actually, there's less. I mean, you have an influx of a large amount of money into a place that is, by definition, because of what we're talking about, which is like rapid development, not used to that. You know, the chance of that being sort of funneled in a sort of effective way seems to me close to zero. And so the assumption that they, or the idea that they will work it out for themselves, and I'm not saying therefore it's your responsibility. I'm not going that far. I'm just saying, you know, I don't know that that happens. And likewise, you know, what you're saying here, you know, so here's an example, I think, of like, so I think I was somewhat frustrated with this woman because I wished that she had knocked on our door and said, I didn't even realize she was doing laundry at first because we just saw her taking things, and then we think she was doing laundry. It was very confusing. And that's the confusion, is where your perspective, I think, might run into challenges, because like in the sort of summarized version, what you're saying makes sense. But what if you see her, and as I did, and you think, well, this person's clearly on something, and this person's probably homeless. Okay, so then you have this element of like her ability to engage with me in like a sort of friendly, neighborly way is impaired, like chemically and by like society, right? Like the way that she is living, if she is living on the street, like that's like a dangerous and uncertain way to live your life that does not make it possible to just like, you know what I mean, be the same kind of friendly person. So then like there's all this other like crud that comes in the decision-making process that makes what you're suggesting a lot more complicated. Does that make sense? Like, you know, from the like 100-mile up view, what you're saying can make a certain sense to me, but I wonder how much it actually pans out in the close-up version.
I have thoughts about that, but I want to let others jump in if you have something else.
I'm just super, you know, I'm very skeptical of systems and government systems because they failed me before. And so I don't necessarily think that they're very, I don't know, they have the best interest for the people in mind. I feel like they're inherently corrupt because unfortunately, you know, people get greedy. And so to me, I feel like sometimes it's my responsibility to help others because I know in the government systems might not, you know, do what they're saying they do, like they often don't. And then, you know, with the problem with the washing machine, I totally feel the same way as you were feeling because I just had something stolen off my car. And, you know, if somebody had asked me for the money, you know, could I have this money? Because I'd rather not steal it off your car and I need money for this, I probably would have said, okay, why? And then thought about it and wanted to help people. And so I see the feeling of what to do with when someone's taking from you, when you probably would have just said yes if they had asked, and that odd feeling. And so I like the washing machine situation. I think it's really good for this conversation.
I think it's interesting. I had an interesting lavanderia, which means like washing place here in Mexico. Like you basically always take your clothes to a lavanderia to get washed. And I actually had 2 pieces stolen from me there. And I was quite upset about this because they were 2 new dresses I didn't even get to wear. And I was upset. And then I said, it's gone. Like, there's nothing for me to do about it. Like it will conjure up more negative energy for me to be upset and wish badness to this person if not. But I think in your situation where this person is in your community and coming back and repeating this offense, I think it's fair to be upset because they are in your community and it's happening on multiple occasions. So I think in respecting yourself, I think that there can come a time and a place where you say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this. We're in the same community and I don't like to be treated this way because I wouldn't treat others like this and I would like to be treated back. So I think within a community, it gets tricky because sometimes the rules are unsaid, but people just know them. And other times you need to say them, like how else are you supposed to know? So I think this is so tricky because there are so many different communities. Now, I will go a little bit against you, Evan, and say that travelers make up a legitimate community because really there are like forum boards and I don't know, like there are places of communication and there is a kind of a set of rules, of unspoken rules. And I think that this conjures up maybe a loose, but I would say it conjures up a community. So I think an important part when we think about collectivism versus individualism is the communities and like the rules that are spoken or unspoken. And I think being a collectivist means that you're adhering to those rules. Does that make sense?
Yeah. As we're talking now, I'm kind of coming up with my definition of collectivism or a collective would be people that you don't see regularly, what you do for them and how you hold them in your mind. I guess that's the distinction that I would make because I'm with you that travelers are a community and I've seen that in Scotland. There's like just empty like little huts along some of the Highland walking routes and they're either occupied or not. There's no reservations, there's no heat, there's just a fireplace and there's a culture of, you leave it reasonably clean when you leave because someone else is going to take it in a day or week, a month. And those people are imagining others like them that are in the quote unquote traveler community. And so there's definitely a community and there is a kind of collectivism in that, which is different from how they would treat the people that they are camping with right there, their direct community. So I was just making the distinction earlier between the social and the collective as having to be more theoretical. You're gonna have to imagine a lot about those people.
Yeah.
Anyway, your point is certainly made.
Okay. And I think just one more thing, I think this is clear for Americans as individualists because we think, no, we don't have rules. We are Americans. We all have the same opportunities. And so we all can do whatever the heck we want in the sake of living our lives. And so we have certain rules and laws or whatever, but the hallmark of American tradition is that we have freedom to do what we want. And our culture is so expansive from the West Coast to the East Coast and everything in between that, I mean, you're supposed to be able to act however the heck you want, but you come into a different culture. Coming to Mexico, I think respecting the culture is how you give to them, right? Like a bare minimum give to them is respecting their culture. And so one of the hugest differences here is time orientation. So if we look at time orientation from like kind of like a schedule that goes bop to time is just like this. So we have Germany where time is very like schedule and regularized, and then the United States, and then kind of Latin Arabic cultures all the way over here. And this was one of the first things I had to really readjust to showing up here because my friends were like, we're gonna go do this, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, it's time, let's go, right? Maddie, it happens when it happens. I was like, but we said this time, Maddie, you're just gonna have to let go because in Mexico, things happen when they happen. They have a word called ahorita, and it literally means now-ish, now-ish. So you don't actually know when the thing is going to happen, but it's now-ish. So I think this is another way of when you're entering in a community, respecting collectivism is to abide by the rules. And this is the contrast we see in the United States, is that we're not really abiding by many rules at all.
I have a question for everyone that I think could be really, really interesting. And it's, what is a group that you belong to that technically you should be collectivist with them? However, you just are individualist because, I mean, I'll do my example. For me, I am religious. However, I don't feel a sort of collectivism towards the general Christian movement because I feel like there's a lot of my own personal things that I don't agree with in it. However, I'm still religious, and so I'm trying to find my own space. And so I'm very individual in those spaces. And I actually push back against a lot of certain organizations that are Christian that, you know, I'm trying to come at from my own perspective. And so I was wondering what other people's quote unquote groups are that they should be in, but they don't feel collective or they don't feel a part of.
Well, for me, there's a lot of things because I generally feel pretty alienated and have most of my life. Like I'm a Jew, and I know that I am culturally a Jew, but I don't feel that connected to Judaism. I'm happy to be in the club because, you know, when other Jews learn that I'm Jewish, it often causes there to be more connection and greater warmth. So I like that. But probably for me, the biggest one that I think like I'm supposed to, in fact, I was more of the collective, but I'm not anymore, is just being a Berkeleyite, being a guy that lives in the city and is a resident of this town, just because I so disagree with the COVID response. So it's alienated me from a sense of belonging to the community. It hasn't alienated me from all the people. There's people that I have really positive feelings towards, but I don't feel like a community member.
You mean like you don't like the regulations they put in or something?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You know, the culture, the ethos here is to stick to the regulations, and I disagree with them. So it puts me at odds, and it's interesting because it's something visible, as we've all seen. There's visible differences between people in the form of mostly mass, but it may be the way people act if they take more distance or whatever. So it's been an interesting, almost like social experiment, not a fun one, but an interesting one if you look at it from high up, in seeing how people are choosing to integrate and get along or not, and trying to figure out what they really believe. But because I know what I believe, and it's different from the majority of people in Berkeley, it puts me at odds, and it's an interesting, you know, not a good feeling, because your local community you do want to be a part of. And I used to be very, very deeply integrated in the community, and I still do things. You know, I held a concert during COVID. I had a series of orchestra concerts in Berkeley to benefit the community, so they would have music when there wasn't any live music. And I host a dad's group where I get together new dads. So I contribute to the community, and I am a part of it, but only in an individual way. When I'm outside, I feel very alienated from it.
Ethan, if you want, I will go ahead. So I'm going to do a big one because I was just running through my head and I was like, I don't know. But I will say, as an American, I feel really apart from being an American. I've been told many times over by my friends from all over the world that I don't seem American. And they say this to me in a complimentary way. and I don't I don't mean to take offense to anybody. The United States and Americans are extremely controversial, and given the opportunity, I do stand up for Americans and say you can't generalize about us. Like, there is so much going on in between all of these states, and there's good and there's bad and there's everything in between, just like every other place, and you cannot just simply generalize. But I do understand, and I do get frustrated with a sort of popular attitude of Americans to show up in a place and expect to speak in English and be understood in English, and to kind of have this overt personality. This is very frustrating for me, because I am learning Spanish as I've been getting here. Luckily, I speak French, which is really helpful. But I've been told with a lot of my friends that are foreign that I'm very easy to understand and talk to because of the way I talk. Like, sometimes I literally speak with a French accent or even a bit of a Mexican accent. I always try to kind of take on parts of the culture that helps me to connect and to be understandable with the local people. It's like the bare minimum that I can do. And so in a way, I do feel outside of like the American, I don't know, like what's expected of Americans. And I think I said this at the very beginning, that I always felt like a foreigner in my own city. So this has just been a common theme throughout my life that has just become more and more as I have pursued traveling and integrating different languages and different cultures into who I am. So yeah, so that's my example.
I think for me, I was kind of surprised as I thought about this that maybe I feel more of an affinity for groups than I might have thought. Certainly a lot more than I did 10 years ago. And I think something that's sort of interesting is that kind of the worse things get, the more connected I feel to being like an American. Like I don't know, it always, I just have a different experience. Some people say, oh, if things get worse, I'm gonna move to another country or something, and I have the opposite reaction, which is, sorry, someone's calling me, which I just need to silence. The worse things get, the more responsibility, the more attached I feel to my role as a person in this country. If everything were great, I wouldn't actually feel any responsibility or attachment at all, I think. I don't know what that says about me, but I do feel like a New Yorker still, in terms of responsibility or affinity. And Evan, as much as there are some things that we may disagree on about Berkeley, I can, having lived here for a year, not that I've really gotten to know the place, but I do think there is a like police mentality that does seem even stronger than the other kind of like liberal enclaves I've lived in the US. Like, it really, do you go on Nextdoor? Do you see Nextdoor at all?
Oh my God.
Oh no, never go on there.
That's a shit show, yeah.
Is a hellscape, but
yeah.
There is, I have to say, I sympathize with what you're saying more than I might have a year ago when I first moved here. I do think that there is a sense of a kind of hyper moralizing, or just there's something here that does feel a bit different than other places I've lived, where I can sympathize with your, or empathize with your reaction to feeling that. And it does make it, I don't feel like a Berkeley. I don't. I hope to in some ways, but and I would say another thing, I actually do feel I do feel a certain like affinity or responsibility, as like in like a positive way, as like a guy and a therapist. Like, I want to, like, one thing that I want to do is like work with men, and I guess men who's had certain kind of experiences, and that is a group that I feel a certain something toward.
Maddie, I wanted to go back to what you're saying about the Americanness. I also lived abroad for an extended period of time, and it was actually in France, and I speak French. And so when people discover I'm not French, they never ever think I'm American. And when I say I'm American, they think it's a joke. And people normally think I'm German or Russian. No idea why, but never American. And so I definitely know what you're saying by, when Americans go places, they expect people to speak English to them. And I definitely saw that when I was living in France, and I would see like tourists come, American tourists, and they would be really rude to the people and just expecting. And most French people speak a decent amount of English and will help if you try to speak French to them. But if you don't, they'll pretend not to speak English, which I think is pretty funny. But yeah, I just wanted to say I totally see where you're coming from with that. And it might be my moving around so much. It might be, not spending my entire life in the US, but I definitely don't feel a strong sense of nationalism. And that might also be how I was raised. I don't know, but I liked your point a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for commenting, being my comrade. I always get that people think I'm French. Like,
Yeah,
everybody.
Or they think they're like, what? You're not French? That's a wet no.
I think it's funny. Well, maybe on the flip side of like, what is a community that you feel you are a part of, but like kind of alienated from? Maybe we could flip it and say, what is a community that you actually feel a part of? And like, how do you feel that you are abiding by their rules, or like that you are in it? So maybe the contrast of what we just did.
I like that. I want to respond to Ethan's point first. I like that you both responded to Grace and Maddie responded to each other, and I feel the urge to respond to Ethan. But then I do want to go to that. All these themes interweave very well. Ethan, I felt a lot of relief with what you said. Thank you for saying that. I think many people hear me talk about my distaste for COVID era Berkeley, and they're just maybe a little confused because it's like, it's not that bad anywhere else, even in the Bay Area, not as bad as Berkeley in terms of the controllingness and moralization, like you said. So it feels validating to hear that. And I also agree with the notion of connecting to men, and I will use that to transition into answering Maddie's question, which is that I don't relate to like all men. I'm not a particularly masculine guy. I guess part of me is, and in fact, I felt pretty alienated from men as a group most of my life, because I'm a fairly feminine man, I would say, in many ways, and that I get along better with women generally, and I kind of pine for a more personal form of communication that most men seem to be incapable of. Not that they don't have the depth of feeling, but they're not going to be like, oh my God, I was just feeling so vulnerable just then. Oh my God, I just need to like cry for a few minutes in the car and then come back. Like, no man I know would ever say something like that, but many women would very, very easily. So I often feel alienated because of that. And yet, as I've changed and become more, have the parts of me feel more integrated and come to terms with my trauma more, and generally like feel a stronger sense of my true self, I do connect more with men. And I think having a son does that too. Having a toddler son is, I'm like, men have this particular culture that they're brought into, and then some of them are just not very vulnerable. I have trouble being as vulnerable as I want to be a lot of the time too, but I really want to help men. I think generally men as a group are not getting help. They're not in vogue. Like the group is not in vogue there's a lot of like fuck men kind of sentiment. There has been for a long time. And men as a group are falling behind, particularly because they can't talk about their emotions. That would change a lot. But they're just not succeeding as much in terms of career as women. I'd say on average, graduating high school, graduating college, like so many more women do than men, and more men are going to jail. And there's a lot of ways to slice and dice it, because the most powerful men control far more than the most powerful women. So that gets into another subject, but the average guy has a lot that he struggles with because he can't talk about his emotions. So I'm like right there with that. And I do connect to the idea of being a man, because we all seem to struggle with that whenever I talk to a guy about it.
I think I'll go next just because mine parallels yours. For me, I feel very connected to feminism and wanting to empower women, but also men's emotions as a whole, because I think that's a really important part of feminism. It's validating men's struggles as well as women's. But I do see myself struggling is sometimes I'm very afraid of men, and that is from experiences that I've had with them. And so that plays out in how I sometimes treat men and treat women differently. Like I'll smile at another woman on the street or compliment her shoes or something, but I would never say that to a man, just because I'm afraid of what the repercussions could be, because they're not always going to be good. And sometimes I can get into more, I don't know, more controversial fights with men because I want to point out something that they're doing that maybe I don't need to actually point out, but I'm getting upset. And so that's an interesting point. But it's very important to me to feel connected to like women's movements and women's rights and betterment, but also like the mental health as a whole of every gender, of every person, that is really important to me. So just wanted to go after you because I think it parallels the men thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Okay. So I came up with being a member of like having a spiritual connection, which I know is still kind of general, but I think either you are spiritual or you're not spiritual. You believe in a higher power, or you don't believe in a higher power. And for most of my life, being raised Catholic, it was very traumatizing for me. I went to Catholic schooling the majority of my life, like through high school and everything. And I just saw a lot of contradictions in the Bible. I was like, this doesn't make sense. And yeah, it was a hard time for me, which doesn't mean it was a hard time for everybody, but for me particularly, it was a hard time. And I shunned off there being a higher power for a really long time until recently, which is when I went to yoga teacher training literally this summer. So I started to open back up, maybe a little bit before, because I did yoga really regularly for like a year. And so when I would do classes, I kind of heard about the spirit and the universe and it looking out for you. And this connected more with me because I like astrology or whatever. And I think if anything makes sense about there being like a higher self, like the universe makes sense because it's the greatest thing that to me has ever been. It was there before we even existed. So when I went to the yoga training, I mean, ultimately, one of the biggest things about yoga is the surrender to the higher power, the universe, and basically that there's a oneness of knowledge and intelligence that is within all of us. But then there's like the oneness that it's like the universal intelligence, but then we also have it within each of us. So for me, this higher power made sense. And I've noticed my conversations that I have with people is different than it was before this summer because I talk about this and I have a new kind of calm about being like, I've been having a hard time, but I know the universe is looking out for me. And I would have never said this stuff before. And I can even say, but God is looking out for me. God is still like kind of like a tricky word for me to say because there's still a lot of attachment to the Catholic teachings and believings. But now, like, it's very integrated in the way that I talk to myself and the way that I talk to other people. And I have a lot less judgment towards other people when they talk about religion or spirituality, because I hold this in myself now as well. Doesn't matter what it is. I mean, anybody can have their own beliefs, but now I feel a part of that community, and it's very much so coming through in the way I move around the world.
Evan, I was wondering if you had something to say, but I don't know. I think I sort of answered this, when I was supposed to be talking about who I didn't feel affinity towards. But yeah, like I said, men is one group, and I guess I could also say, as I am Jewish, and sort of a mixture of both sides. I feel some inclination to kind of separate myself and distance myself, and I also feel a certain affinity. Yeah.
What's the certain affinity?
I don't know exactly. I mean, if I see, I'm imagining the scene. Like, I mean, if I see an Orthodox person on the street in, Williamsburg or something, I mean, I do feel fewer degrees of separation away from them significantly than if I see somebody a Catholic priest, you know what I mean? Like they each have like identifiable garb, and you know what I mean? And it's kind of hard to put your finger on it, but there's just some way in which they are fewer steps away from me. And yeah.
I actually lived at a Jewish camp for 3 months. I'm not Jewish, but I was working there, and it was so interesting to see the community of people, that some were extremely religious and some were just born Jewish, and they were still at that camp. And it was really beautiful to see just, people meshing together. So I can see why you would sort of want to be towards it, because it seems like such a, I don't know, obviously there's downsides to everything, but it seems like such a close-knit community, I don't know, but it was really interesting for me to see.
Yeah, that reminds me that when I lived in New York for most of my life, but when I was living in Manhattan, it was a relatively frequent occurrence once every few months that I'd be walking on the street in Manhattan, which is, there's thousands of people on the street. And an Orthodox Jewish man would often come up to me and be like, "Are you Jewish?" And I would be like, first I'd be like, "Why are you talking to me? We don't talk to people in New York." And then I'd be like, if I felt like engaging, I'd say, "Yeah." And he'd say, we need one more to make a, why am I forgetting the Jewish word?
A minion.
A minion, thank you. A minion. And basically then he needed me to go upstairs with his like family and his wife and his newborn baby and stuff like that, and just sit and have dinner. Believe it or not, this is a common thing that happens. And I was just welcome because I was Jewish. And I kind of love that exists. I had a few nice experiences. I mean, it's a religious thing that you need like 8 or whatever it is. Again, Ethan, tell me if that's wrong, but it's some number.
8 or 10, but yeah.
Okay.
It was so weird being like I was a baker, and I was like the camp's boy baker, and there was 5 non-Jewish people in a camp of 400 people. So I'm just sitting there watching all the Shabbat dinners going on. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. And even though I was obviously not Jewish, not even close to Jewish, like it was interesting to just feel like just seeing all these people just be connected over food and over.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty cool community. It's pretty cool.
It's beautiful. I love stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, that's
Challah.
I'm sorry.
I made a lot of challah.
Oh, that's delicious. Yeah, that's like I want more of that in my life. I feel like who doesn't want more of that? More of a feeling of you're part of a village in some way, even a large village, and you're welcome, serendipitous connections, and that's one of the most beautiful parts of life. I do, even though it's a less fun topic, I do want to return to what my reaction to what Maddie said. I think Ethan noticed that I had somewhat of a reaction. Now, my reaction is like, that's awesome what you're saying. And I believe that if I were to identify in one way or the other, identify as a spiritual person. I don't particularly like care about God right now. That's not an important part of my life. But I do believe that, in hundreds of years, we'll be talking basically more the way you're talking. Maybe not the idea that, the universe is looking out for you. That I don't connect with as much, because the universe often does not look out for you at all, but that people look out for you, and the energy between people can be a more valuable currency than money, like you said before. I think that really strikes me as true. However, my reaction was almost, a separate subject, which is, you're talking in a way that I used to relate to, a very free way. That was my reaction, is you sound very free when you talk about that, possibly because you're in Mexico traveling. And because I've been in Berkeley throughout the whole, COVID stuff, I don't feel free. So I'm not free to explore energy and talk about the universe and travel as much. I mean, I would be free to travel if I didn't have such a young child. That makes it much harder, because I need to put him before myself. But yeah, I don't know what I want to say about that. We don't have to get into my personal, my issues. We can, but it's I yearn for that freedom that you're talking about, that I had before this, where you can meet people and have experiences and think about higher concepts. I mean, that's, I think, how I'm going to get to being more collective minded and put myself second, maybe my family first, but then myself third, behind like community sometimes, not always, but community, or maybe larger society in some way. I like the idea of doing that, but I can't get there until I feel free again. So I feel jealous when I see that, because I recognize the energy of freedom.
Yeah, and I think being outside of the United States right now is kind of helpful, actually, because I feel like it's really difficult to have discussions in the United States, especially kind of in the places where you are. It's difficult in St. Louis as well, because a lot of history and racial tensions and politics in St. Louis. Like Missouri was like a split state when it came to the Civil War. So it's like a hot spot. Like we're really in the middle of the country, and there's like so much happening there. The city itself is blue, and then you go outside of the city, like barely, it's red. So it's interesting, and I do feel a sense of freedom, and I've definitely been empowered by the traveler spirit, which is that we're discovering and we're free thinking, and we can have expansive conversations and whatever, because maybe you won't ever see that person again, so you can just kind of play around with what you're saying. But then in the yoga teacher training, like a lot of these concepts were kind of solidified there, and the speak became very normalized. And I've kept up contact with that community of my yoga teacher training community. I feel very much so a part of that community, and they're mostly from all over the United States, and I keep up with them. So I keep this speech going. It's been completely integrated into who I am at this point in my life. So I think this is kind of funny, because as I was saying earlier, like Americans are supposed to be very individualistic and not have rules and say whatever they want. But I think at this point in the United States, it's getting very tricky to feel that you can actually say and do whatever you want. So.
Grace, I'm kind of curious about you. Do you feel free? because it feels like you're at a different stage of life where you're not
Yeah,
economically free or
I'm a
something.
lot younger than I think most people here are. Not trying to age. I just think that's a fact. I'm 20, so I'm young.
Yes.
But I'm also someone who has internalized a lot of other people's emotions, as well as a lot of trauma, as well as a lot of things that makes me really heavy. And so right now I'm working really hard to feel free from depression and anxiety, which has been, a journey for years. And also I'm trying hard to live in the kind of way that I want to live and I feel free without internalizing what other people think of me. And I don't really have a problem with, at college, the cool kids wear this. I've never wanted to be cool. It's never my thing. It's more towards, well, if I don't behave this certain way, I feel like I'm not worth as much. And so I'm working really hard to realize I need to do what I enjoy doing. And, that's what's going to help me feel free. And so that it's just been a journey. So I'm working on it. And I'm someone who speaks my mind pretty freely. And to me, if somebody with opposite political views or social views doesn't want to be my friend anymore because I challenge their opinions or they challenge mine, I don't know if that's the kind of person that I want to be friends with, because to me it's important that friends challenge each other's beliefs or talk to each other about hard stuff. I'm the kind of person who will always make Thanksgiving awkward every time because of the topics I bring up. Like my step grandma, she was saying, "Oh yeah, there's so much of a labor, like no one's working anymore, like there's so many jobs." I'm like, better open up that border so we can get all those jobs filled. They've been in for years. And maybe I shouldn't have said that, but it's a thought. And so yeah, I feel free enough to speak, but it's also been hard because as a young woman, when you speak your mind, it often can, I'm often called, you know, bossy or, you know, opinionated, whereas a male counterpart saying those exact same things with, oh, he's just really into politics or he's really straightforward. And for me, if I don't sugarcoat things, people think I'm rude, even though I'm really blunt. And so I feel free, not free yet, but I feel free to speak, but not free from my own issues. But I feel free enough to speak, but I also see how it's hard for other people to speak. I
Makes
mean,
sense.
for you especially. I mean, for me, I think it's just because I have, different views on what you have from what it sounded like with COVID, but I think it's, you deserve to be able to speak how you want to speak about it and live how you want to live about it. And for me, it's, I'm going to live my life this way. For example, with the COVID thing, I'm vaccinated and I still wear a mask when I go into buildings. And that's how I live. But that doesn't necessarily give me the right to say you're a horrible person because you're not doing that. And I think it's important that people express themselves in their own way. I can only control myself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ethan, anything come up for you around this stuff?
I don't think so. I mean, a small thing which is not the main point, but I was just noticing a thought that you probably don't have that freedom in Berkeley to. But I was saying, I also don't object to people. I don't think it's necessarily wrong to tell other people that you think they should wear a mask. But what I do think is wrong is if you are shunned or humiliated for not wearing a mask, as a concrete example.
I feel like COVID took away people's ability to be kind to everyone. because
Mhm.
my mom's a little hippy dippy, and she raised me to be kind to everyone, no matter who they are, where they come from, what they look like. And I feel like COVID and the recent elections have really polarized at least Americans, and we feel like we don't need to just be kind in general. You don't have to agree, you don't have to respect, but it's really important to be kind.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I agree with this point as well. And I 100% agree with the polarization. I think it's really bad. I think it's given people an excuse to be mean and rude, unlike they would before. Because, I mean, a hallmark of American tradition is also to be like overly nice. When you hear customer service, hi, la 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 la, la, and like it's gone out the window on this topic. There's an extreme judgment, and the judgment is not being hidden or decorated at all. Like it's just there. I remember I was slow to get the vaccine, and I was being judged by people around me constantly for it. But I think what you were saying, Grace, is that everybody's beliefs and opinions are valid. And who are we to judge them, even if we don't believe them? We're not all living in the same world. We literally are all living in our own worlds with different lenses of how we see, and how can we tell somebody how they should move through the world when we can't even see how their lenses are, you know? So I 100% agree with you. I feel a lot of camaraderie with the things that you have been saying.
Well, I mean, for example, a Buddhist is going to have a completely different view than I have on life, but that doesn't mean their spiritual experience is any less valid than mine. They're in their own lens. And I get really upset when people start making religion into politics, because why would you want someone to conform to the rules of your religion, but they don't agree with you at all, but they have to live by your rules? It just gets confusing for me. I don't like it.
You both are expressing strong individualism here.
Yeah.
Everybody should be able to do what they want to do. I'm sure you would agree that if it's like, yelling fire in a movie theater, that there's a line there, but you probably tilt a little bit more towards generally do what you do, try not to hurt other people, and live and let live. It sounds like Ethan has commonality there, but is a little bit more towards collectivism, because he said it would, I feel fine about telling other people I think you should wear a mask, but he didn't go so far as to say I think you should shun them. He said you shouldn't. So it seems like, Ethan, you feel a little differently, not hugely, but just a bit more towards collectivism. Am I characterizing that right?
I guess in this dimension, at least, in the sense that I don't think everyone should. I don't aspire to a world where everyone can do and say whatever they want at all. That is not at all my a daydream fantasy goal for me. And I don't think, the question like, who are we to judge? I don't know. I think judgment is part of living in the world. And I don't think you should take that judgment and shun or humiliate or punish people excessively. But judging is part of life. I mean, I think that's my view anyway. I mean, um, would the world be better without judgment? I don't know about that. Some parts would be and other parts wouldn't be.
I
Yeah.
I kind of so I agree with what you're saying, because at one, I'm very young, but at one point in time, I was super black and white, and it caused me immense anxiety, so much anxiety and so much built up tension of constantly, why aren't these people doing the rules that, like, I'm following these rules? Why aren't they following these rules? And then I just realized I cannot control them. No matter what I do, I cannot control everything to make everyone follow the rules, to make everyone live this certain way. So whether, like, there's a lot of things that I think people shouldn't do, and I think, they should do something else, but for me, I had to prioritize. I'm just so anxious and getting so much anxiety from this. I would rather let go and just try to live and control what I can control, which is myself, and that's it. But I agree with what you're saying. I see what you're saying, where you're coming from, definitely.
I do as well. And I would say for me, yes, I think people should say and do whatever they want within the confines of not hurting themselves or others. That's, as long as you're not hurting yourself or other people, express yourself. I think that's the most important thing, is to live your truth and to express yourself. I think it not only helps yourself, but it helps others along the way. And then one last little thing is, I think maybe there's a little nuance between judgment and discernment. I think it's really important to discern with people if people are negative for you in your life or if they're positive. And I think it's really important to discern. But as far as like judgment for me means actually like engaging energy, where I'm judging somebody and I'm like putting negative energy on them. So yeah, that was just like my last 2 cents on everything.
And I guess I want to react back, saying that I can't tell why the two propositions you put forth, Ethan, are in opposition to each other. You said you don't like the idea of people being able to do and say whatever they want, or you said that's not your utopian goal. I think that's a wonderful goal. I think people should be able to do that, knowing that there's always the balance. You can't harm others. But then we're in a immensely difficult conversation there, because you could say, well, if you are mean to someone, or if you say something that they don't like, are you harming them? Or if, all the COVID stuff, it can easily go there. Are you harming people if you walk 4 feet away from them or something? So we'll all have different lines there. But the idea of judgment, or, I'm taking that as feedback, that's immensely valuable. I think it would be hard to dispute the value of judgment feedback, social feedback. That's how we all learn how to live in our society and in our social groups. So yeah, even though I disagree with the notion that you said that, or I live differently, I want people to be able to do and say whatever they want as much as possible, because I think that's how creativity and happiness and joy happens the most. Although I do admit that in far more collectivist societies, maybe there's intense joy in fitting into the group and doing the customs just the way the other people do. But my view is, I love freedom. I'm super into all freedoms that can be done without really infringing on others' right to experience happiness and meaning in their lives. I big fan of people being able to talk and judge. That's part of what this, video series is about. I just want to see if there's anything you would clarify or.
Yeah, I mean, just the first thing you said, I think is right, which is that like the question about doing what you want without harming people, it's like who gets to decide what constitutes harm? If you have the Jains in charge, you have some people say, you drink filtered water so you don't kill microorganisms. You know what I mean? And other people might say, I want to drive my truck without a catalytic converter or whatever, and that's no problem. I mean, and much worse things than that. I want to stone somebody who broke the rules or whatever. So it gets really hard to say what constitutes harming somebody. So yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, no, I thought what you were saying was a very fair reflection of what I had said my view was, and yeah, I don't feel the need to clarify.
Okay. All right, guys. So we've reached the end of our time. Any reflections, as we're still kind of on camera before we totally end, just on the dialogue so far? We've had 2. I know, Maddie, you've only been in 1, but any reflections that you would want to kind of publicly share that are of interest in terms of how we've been talking. I think everybody's gotten a reasonable chance to participate. I've tried as, a quasi moderator to make sure that nobody's kind of getting away with talking too generally, that it always gets personal, because I think that's where the opportunity to see real dialogue and working out tensions and working at like this human relations is. So I feel that we did a good job with that. Is there any other feedback for me?
I really enjoyed this. I like being able to have dialogues with people, and everyone here is really different, and I like that. I think you probably did that intentionally.
Yes.
I think we're all quite different, which is more than most situations in which I'd find myself talking to 3 other people.
I don't feel that we're so different. Actually, I feel like we're all pretty open-minded and pretty cordial. Like, yeah, maybe, but I guess I'm used to being around so many different cultures, like at this point in my life, that I'm kind of used to bigger contrasts. But I really appreciated this discussion, and that we can express certain differences of opinions, clarify them, and do it in a cordial way.
Thank you.